Hello and welcome to the EduTalk series hosted by Biotone EduPartner Program, and massage industry experts. With the challenges that have faced massage schools, students, and practicing therapists thanks to COVID and its variants, the EduTalk series hosted by Biotone continues to support virtual learning and building massage community by connecting you with industry experts who share their knowledge and expertise on topics not only for class discussion, but career success. Tonight's expert is Paul Kohlmeyer, a massage therapist, educator, and practitioner of Chinese medicine. He's a self-professed research nerd and an avid supporter of understanding the research and adding the evidence found to his trainings and coursework. Additionally, Paul is busy with a mobile practice and is owner of Cupping Canada and Cupping USA supply and education companies. Let's listen and learn as Paul discusses cupping and understanding the evidence. As massage therapy becomes more regulated in the US and Canada, it's important as massage therapists to stay informed in the research that surrounds and supports your practice. Paul will review literature about cupping therapy and discuss how cupping can fit into your evidence-informed practice. Thank you again for joining us tonight. And please check questions, which Paul will answer at the end. And I appreciate you having your sound and your videos off. Thank you and welcome, Paul. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you, Danelle. Thank you for having me. Of course, thank you, Biotone, for hosting these events. They are quite magic. So without much further ado, let me share my screen with you and we can talk about cupping and the evidence. So I hope everyone can see that. So what we're here for is cupping, understanding the evidence, and we'll blister through these next couple of slides because we already talked about them, but I just want to start you guys off all with a thought. And the thought that I'm working on today is that language is really important. Language is important because it's how we communicate with everyone we come into contact with. But as a professional, we must make sure that we're communicating appropriately with our clients, with our colleagues, to the general public. And so if we have to think about language being important, then we really have to think about the language surrounding the types of treatments we do. And we have to understand that language is influenced by perception of the meaning of words, by phrases, and by concepts in general. And around cupping, there's some interesting things because the language gets influenced by how old it is, by how popular it is, by definitions and then redefinitions proposed and explored through science, and exploration of meanings. So I really think that we have to, as a group, really take time to reflect on what the language is that we're learning and we're using every day in our practices. So for me, in an evidence-informed practice, what that means, and there's the people bandy around the words evidence-informed versus evidence-based. I think it's really important to think about if there isn't a base of cupping or of whatever manual therapy you're applying, if there isn't a base of using that to treat this specific condition in this specific way, then we can't be evidence-based anymore, but we can be evidence-informed, okay? And this means that we've kind of got the idea, well, if these things are true in the evidence, then it's possible that this is also true. And we'll go with that until we hear otherwise from people who actually look at the research and do the research. So if we're in a if we're in an evidence-informed practice, we pretty much have to use Western medical terms. And that includes the way we discuss about physiology, the way we understand physiological processes, whether that's going from a disease process to health, or even how disease is caused and progresses. I mean, we must look at the current evidence for our assessments and treatments so that we can lead our clients to better outcomes. Because ultimately, our clients come to us because they want a specific outcome. And that outcome can be varied, and you have to figure that out by how you assess your patient. And part of that is just talking to them and saying, what do you need to get out of this treatment for you to be happy with it? And then we can use evidence-informed assessments and then evidence-informed treatments to hopefully lead them towards those better outcomes. Because hopefully everyone wants to use their training to be a little bit more effective in what you're doing. So within the industry, especially around cupping, we have to think about what language is appropriate, because there's a lot of things that people say around cupping that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think it's partially because of the age of cupping. Now, the practice of cupping is really quite old, and it is probably started sometime in prehistory, but we know that it has been documented at least 3,500 years. There's this Ebers papyrus. It's a Egyptian medical record that was found in a tomb or some such thing. And it was dated to somewhere around 1550 BC, which is quite a long time ago. So cupping has been at least written down since then. Most likely it was used quite a bit previous to that. And I think that that is the basis for some of the language that is used around cupping, because you have to understand that cupping's been used in many different cultures. It's used throughout many eras in history. It's been used throughout many, many medical systems. And these kinds of things kind of load the treatment with words, because that's how we present concepts to each other. I mean, one of the first written records of cupping, there is a lot of talk about warding of ghosts and spirits or doing exorcisms, and that was considered medicine at the time. Now, would I apply cupping as an exorcism today in my medical practice? Probably not appropriate, not even appropriate to be discussion, or to have that discussion, I should say, rather than, okay, I just got a pop up on my screen, sorry about that. So it's probably not appropriate to discuss warding of ghosts and spirits within a Western medical context, in a professional context. I mean, we have to think even that there's this idea of bad air as that transmitted disease before we got to the idea of that there are bacteria and viruses and other such things that are pathogenic that can affect the human body. In many different cultures, even there's been whole groups of medicine or styles of medicine that cupping has been fit in with. And we know that people like Galen and Hippocrates were writing about cupping in relation to how it treated specific conditions, but also how it balanced the four humors within Greek medicine. A little bit later on in the written record, Chinese medicine started writing about cupping, as it is one of the treatments that is used. And it not only, again, we talk about specific conditions that it can treat, but we also talk about it within the confines of five element theory, or the theory of blood, chi, and body fluids, or the theory of the six pathogenic factors, these kinds of things. So, which unfortunately don't mean a whole lot in today's Western medical environment. I mean, in Ayurvedic medicine, it's written about and it refers to how it will treat around the 3 doshas, why you'd use a specific technique for each dosha. So I think it's really interesting because we've had this whole group of different styles of medicine which lends words to cupping. And I think it's important to understand that those words, as they were used within that medicine, may not mean the exact same thing as the words that are used in medicine today. I like to refer to Chinese medicine as alternate physiology, because it is not the way we believe physiology works in Western medical theory. It actually butts its head against it really quite often. But I think it's really important to understand that even though the words or the alternate physiology works within the confines of its own ideas, as long as the type of understanding that you have from assessment all the way through to examination to treatment, as long as it makes logical sense, you can use it within those words or within that treatment. However, when it comes to discussing it with the client, it's often better to use more Western medical terms, simply for the fact as that most people, especially if you're practicing in North America, most people are trained in Western medicine physiology. I mean, in health class in grade 5 and up, I learned I learned Western medical terms. I learned Western medicine anatomy. I learned Western medicine disease processes. I never learned Chinese medicine. Didn't learn that until Chinese medicine school. So I think it's important when communicating to a client to not break their idea of how their body works. And so when I communicate around cupping, we definitely communicate from a Western medicine standpoint. And there's a few different things that we can probably say. So whereas if you are practicing Greek medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese medicine or any other traditional form of medicine, it probably means that even though we're using that internally, the language of the medicine internally, when we talk to our patients, we should probably be talking in Western physiology. It just makes a lot more sense. So really the question comes, is there any evidence? So I took this out a little bit and we're going to talk about things that there isn't any evidence for, there's a very big lack of evidence for first, because I like to get these kinds of things out of the way. We always start with contraindications, not indications, right? So this is kind of follows that same idea. So there's this idea in Chinese medicine, and if you've ever, or in Western medicine, even in terms of cupping, if you've ever looked on Facebook or social media about people talking about cupping, they very frequently talk about cupping as to do with removing toxins or taking toxins away from the body, or that our bodies are toxic, which is really interesting because when it comes to cupping, there has been no investigation that I know of that they measure for toxins. And certainly there's no evidence that shines out that says we remove toxins from the body with cupping. As a Chinese medicine practitioner, I think I understand where that filtered into the English language, but I don't think it's true. I think if you have a Chinese medicine toxin, and toxins are specific. It's a specific medical terminology within Chinese medicine, and you'll have a heat toxin, a damp toxin, and they're always specific. And we don't, in Chinese medicine, we don't get rid of toxins, we resolve them. And I don't know that when it was translated from Chinese to English by whoever did the translation, I don't think it was very clear that about that, but nevertheless, we have a lot of discussion about toxins in cupping therapy. And I would say to you, as a practitioner, there's no evidence that they exist in terms of cupping therapy and that we can affect them in any way. So I don't think it's an appropriate thing to be saying within your Western medical practice. And let's go all the way to the other side of that. And some people talk about decompressing fascia or stretching the tissue specifically with cups. And I think that's really interesting because there's not a whole lot of published studies around this either. There are no studies that I have been able to find on how much suction do you need to affect the tissue other than just the skin and subcutaneous adipose tissue. There is no research that says if you provide suction at this amount in either millimeters of mercury or pounds per square inch, always listed as a negative because it's suction, then you will get this much depth of penetration of the suction. And so I think that's really interesting. And I'm actually not even sure that we do have a tissue effect with cupping. I think a lot of the results can be argued that they are created by either a neurological effect or by an effect on the capillary beds themselves, so a hematological effect. So I think that's interesting. There's a lot of discussion about cupping marks and the physiology of them, and most people have a very strongly held belief in what's happening under a cup. And I can tell you that there has been really almost no investigations about what the cupping mark is. Most of the time in Western physiology, we understand that this is a bruise. And so unless someone's got some investigation out there that I have not seen, I would love to see it if there is. At this point, I would say the cupping mark itself, most likely the purple round cupping mark is a bruise. And you should be okay with saying that, because that's what makes most sense in terms of Western physiology. Now, there has been some investigations of blood flow pre and post treatment, but nothing about what has actually occurred physiological in the tissue beneath the cup pre and post treatment. So, or even in the capillary bed. So I think it's interesting. And there is a big history, I guess, of using cups to do lymphatic drainage. And I would say that there is no investigation that I've ever found that backs up that, that type of treatment. So if you are talking about doing lymphatic drainage with cupping, I think that you have to make sure that you are applying cupping as a soft tissue modality and applying cupping in a way that mimics the lymphatic drainage style of soft tissue work. So I think those are the important things around evidence. One of the other things that I did want to say about cupping marks, I think it's important to understand that most of Western physiology deals with cupping mark as a side effect of a treatment, not that it has any sort of treatment effect in and of itself, or that it means anything. There is no evidence that it means anything other than there's a bruise in the area. So I see a lot in social media about what the cupping mark means. As a Chinese medicine practitioner, I can say to you that without much doubt, there are some generalizations you can make about a person's health, but they do not mean this equals this. It's this style of cupping mark could equal 15 things, absolutely, but there has been no investigation of them. So we treat them in our courses and in our clinic as just a side effect of treatment, and you don't even need to create one to have an effective treatment. So I really don't think that they're a thing worth mentioning other than as informed consent. So what can we say? And so this is where I think we can shine as manual therapists, as healthcare providers. So from the study, effects of cupping therapy in amateur and professional athletes, systemic review of randomized controlled trials, which was done by Bridget and a number of other associates in 2018. One of their things that they said was, you could probably say with some confidence that you will get a decrease in clients' perception of pain and disability, an increase in their range of motion, and if investigated, a decrease in creatine kinase. And I think these are really important things for us as manual therapists, because most of our clients come in with some sort of perception of pain or perception that they're disabled. I mean, how many times a day do you hear, well, I can't lift my shoulder up and get something out of the cupboard. I can't bend down to pick up my grandchildren or children. I can't sit comfortably in a chair. These kinds of things, which may not be pain related. They might tell you that they're in pain, but they might also tell you that they're feeling disabled. They're feeling like they're not able to do something. Now, increasing range of motion, I want to put a caveat on that, because the research kind of goes both ways on this. Now, when you're talking about increased range of motion, as a clinician applying cupping for what it's indicated for, you have to think about, is there a decreased range of motion existing? Because there's enough studies on healthy individuals that show that if you apply cupping, you aren't going to make a healthy person's range of motion statistically better. However, if the person has an injury or a decreased range of motion, you most likely will create a statistically significant increase in their range of motion. Now, the last line in this little part here is a decrease in creatine kinase. Now, this is probably showing that cupping is having an anti-inflammatory effect systemically, because this is tested by the people who are investigating. So the researchers are doing a test to usually blood test, creatine kinase pre-treatment, doing the treatment, and then doing a test for creatine kinase again afterwards, and seeing how persistent that is. Now, the interesting thing about that is it does show a decrease in inflammation, because creatine kinase is a marker for inflammation in the body. Now, I don't know that I would go around saying that we decrease inflammation. That might not be true, but it might be. So I tend to apply it on patients who have either perception of pain, perception of disability, decreased range of motion, or some kind of systemic inflammatory effect. Now, one of the contraindications, of course, is don't put cups right on the swollen areas. So you have to keep that in mind. However, we can say that cupping probably has some sort of anti-inflammatory effect. There was a study that was just published in 2020, effect of pressures and durations of cupping therapy on skin blood flow responses. Here they used studied by Doppler flowmetry, which is a way of using basically a weather radar handheld to see how blood flows through tissue underneath the Doppler. And they say that there is a reactive hyperemia after cupping. Now, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, does that make a difference? Is that part of why we're getting a treatment effect? Well, I don't know. And certainly the authors of this paper did not know, and they had an assumption. They are probably one of the first people to look at this, though. So they were trying to kind of break ground. So I'll give them that. But it's one of the first that shows what's happening, or what may be happening just pre and just post treatment to the tissue that has been cupped. They had a lot of interesting things to say. It's a good article. I highly recommend reading it. So what else can we say? Click. Okay, there are a whole bunch of conditions in which cupping has been shown to have some results. And so there's nonspecific low back pain, there's carpal tunnel syndrome, neck pain, arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, herpes zoster, facial paralysis, cough, dyspnea, acne, lumbar disc herniation, cervical spondylitis. Okay. So these are all very interesting, but let's look a little bit further into what the research actually had to say, because I think it's really interesting. Because if you just pull up, you go into PubMed, you go cupping therapy, hit enter, you will find all sorts of stuff that's treated, but is it treated in the way that we think we would do it in our treatment rooms? Maybe, maybe not. So the first article was by Bridget et al. In 2018, and this was a systemic review, which means they took a whole bunch of studies and reviewed them to see what they could figure out. So this was 11 random controlled studies that were included. This is the one that said cupping is beneficial for perceptions of pain and disability, increased range of motion, and reductions of creatine kinase. I like this one. They compared it to a mostly untreated control groups. So there was a control, and it was versus treatment group versus control group. So I like that. Most of the control groups were untreated. So does it work better than another type of therapy? We don't know. But it does work better than doing nothing. Okay. So the unfortunate part about this is that most of the trials that these 11 RCTs, which is randomized control trial, which is kind of the best way to do a study if you can. These types of these types of studies, they are measured in a systemic review. Or systematic review, pardon me, and they are looked at to see if there is bias. And, but what is bias? Bias is, what are the chances that the study was designed to show what they wanted to see, rather than trying to eliminate biases, which well-done studies try to eliminate the bias of the people doing the study. So unfortunately here we had either an unclear or high risk of bias. So we can say these things probably happen. In 11 studies, they showed changes in perceptions of pain and disability, increased range of motion, reductions in creatine kinase. But if these studies were better, would it still show that? Okay, so like all science, there is a caveat. Let's just see, we'll use this language until it's studied and it's proven true or false. And 11 studies don't prove anything. So this study, effect on blood pressure and duration of cupping therapy on skin blood flow responses. This was Wang et al. In 2020. Now, an interesting thing happened, and I would like you to know about it because I think it's fun. As I look through research, I'll do a PubMed search. So I'll just pull up PubMed and I type in cupping and some other words just to try and see what's new, what's interesting in terms of cupping therapy. And this one I'd never seen before other than about a week ago. So I wanted to read it, and the abstract was available online. But the full article, and this one is a free article, so I was able to pull it down. But these researchers, this research group out of the University of Illinois, also had a few newer studies which weren't free articles. So in in the PubMed directory, it asked to speak with this person right here if you had any inquiries. So I sent them an email and I said, hey, I love this study. And I see that you do have done a few others. I don't have access to them. Would you mind sending them to me? And an hour later, I received a response with the studies attached in email. So it never hurts to ask, because they don't, if you went to whatever journal that they were published under and you paid your $15.50 to, or whatever it is, to download a copy of the article, the authors actually don't get paid for that most of the time. So I think it's really interesting to just ask for it and see if you can get it. So in terms of this study, basically what they did is use that Doppler flowmetry to measure the blood flow in the skin just before and just after cupping. And in this particular group, they made them come in, the same person come in 4 times to get different interventions each time. And they normalized them for an hour, I believe it was an hour beforehand. So this was interesting because this study provides the first evidence showing the effect of pressures and durations of cupping therapy on skin blood flow responses. Now, and it wasn't the responses necessarily that you'd guess for. So I thought that was also interesting. But as a clinician, does skin blood flow mean anything to me? I don't know yet. As I say, I've seen this in a week ago. Now I have to go back and start looking at what determinants of health or what health problems are either treated or show as a decreased skin blood flow response. So I think it's important to understand that you have to look at these as, well, sometimes they don't help you at all, but they might provide a stepping off point to further your own education. This is a different one in 2017, and this was the effect of cupping therapy for low back pain. So here only 6 studies, 6 randomized controlled trials were included in this meta-analysis. So what is a meta-analysis? Meta-analysis takes the whatever they measured pre and post treatment, and it groups everything they measured. So if the first study had 10 people, the second study had 10 people, the third study had 10 people, the fourth study, et cetera, 10 people for each study, the people who do meta-analyses would take those 60 subjects and combine them all into one group to see if there is an effect. And there's a lot of wiggling in this on how to do it. But in this particular case, they said cupping is superior to the control group, especially around VAS and ODI scores. Now, VAS is your visual acuity score. So this is when they draw a line on a piece of paper and they say, okay, if 0 is here and 10 is here, where's your pain today? And the person draws a line. That is visual acuity score. And then ODI is the Oswestry Disability Index, and it is a standardized test to see or to find out how disabled someone perceives themselves or is in their daily life. So cupping increased the outcomes of both the VAS, so pain scale, and disability in these ones for patients with low back pain. Mickelson in 2009, effects of traditional cupping therapy in patients with carpal tunnel syndrome, a randomized controlled trial. So this is one trial. Now, this was actually quite a lot of people. They had 26 or 29 people in the control or in the treatment group and 26 in the control group. But here they're talking specifically about wet cupping, which is not something we would necessarily do within our Western medicine manual therapy practice. Wet cupping, for those of you who don't know, is where they are doing bleeding. So they cut the skin and put cups on and try and draw blood out. It's bloodletting. Here, the control group was really interesting. They put a heat pack on their trapezius muscle, and they found a significant difference between the treatment and the control group for the outcomes that they measured. Okay. Loach in 2012, again, here for nonspecific neck pain. Again, it's a randomized control study. Here they applied wet cupping again. So, and this one was a single treatment, and they showed changes specifically in the SF36, which again is one of those, like the Oswestry Disability Index. It's an index that is standardized in such a way that it will give you a very good picture about how well the person is living their life, whether it's, and it's mostly around pain and their ability to function physically in their daily life. This one was also interesting because they saw changes in the pressure pain threshold as well. And now pressure pain threshold is this idea that everyone, if you press them hard enough on any part of their tissue, there will be an amount of pressure that they then say, oh, that hurts. So if you treat a person, hopefully, if they're in pain, hopefully at the end of the treatment, if you press them at the same pressure, and they actually make a thing to press to test the weight that it elicits pain, this is a thing that is looked at in a lot of different studies, and they applied it to this particular one in terms of a cupping therapy. So for nonspecific neck pain, this was statistically relevant. This one, I don't even know how to pronounce that name, so I'm just going to leave it, 2012. Pulsatile cupping. Now, pulsatile cupping is really interesting because what it is they put a cup on, and they usually through using an outside pump which is computer control, it increases and decreases the amount of suction over the time the cup is left on. So in this particular case, cups were left on. I'm actually not sure how long they were left on in this one, but what they did is they treated them 8 sessions, so 2 times a week for 4 weeks. So people got put into a control group or a treatment group. There were significant changes after the intervention, and there were some persistent changes that happened over 12 weeks. And here we see VAS again, the San Francisco 36 again, and now a new one, WOMAC, which is the Western Ontario and McMaster University's Osteoarthritis Index. Now, I think it's really interesting. I want to show you a picture because cupping is not usually done with this kind of tool. They had this gigantic cup, and they just put it over top of the person's knee. That hose is connected to the pump that they have that will change the pressure over time. Now, I realize that we are going to run out of time if I keep talking the way I'm talking. So I'm going to reserve a little bit of time for questions because I know we brought some up. I've included for you as much full text research articles as I could that you will either have gotten or will get emailed out. So there is 2 more studies that you guys can look at as you go. I think they're really interesting. So I would like to say thank you for attending and thank you for letting me come in. Danelle, if you're around, I would appreciate if you pop back on because I think
I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Okay,
Let
let's
me
see.
stop sharing. We
I
can come
don't
back
know
to
what
this
goes
screen.
on here. All right.
There you go.
Hi. Hi
Hi.
again. I found my way back.
Great.
Thank you. Great information. And yes, tomorrow in the follow-up, along with the recording link to Paul's talk this evening, there will be 3 studies that we'll include and send along. And Paul's contact information will also be in the email tomorrow. So if you have any other questions, Paul, I don't know if you've been watching the comments that have come in, but I do see a question here from Sherry. Are the benefits of cupping similar to those of Moxie cones?
Okay, so I would say generally not, though some of them can be. So with moxibustion or Moxie cones being used, that is a heat type of therapy. They, in Chinese medicine, we've been using moxa for thousands of years probably. And it's burning of a herb, and specifically to moxa cones, it's a small cone of this raw herb that is put on a point, usually with something in between it, but not necessarily, and then lit on fire. And it smolders away and creates a lot of heat that is pushed into the body, or it's pushed into the body and the 360 degrees spherically all the way around it. So they do see that there is a infrared response and a change in blood flow actually to the body during the moxibustion treatment. Though with cupping, we don't generally measure because there's an ischemia, or at least we think there's an ischemia caused by the edge of the rim into the skin because of the way it presses when there's suction. So we don't know if the blood flow would be the same or not. I hope someone does that. I would appreciate it.
Wonderful. And I'm not sure if you saw the comments.
I've seen a couple. There's a couple that said Gott et al. 2008 published in Journal of Lymphedema. Great. Donahue and Donahue in 2019.
Yes.
Excellent. I'm going to look both of those up.
All right. There was another one. Please address cupping with movement versus static.
I don't know. I think it's mostly personal preference. So what they're talking about is massage cupping where the cup is moved around the skin and dragged around, hopefully with lubrication, because otherwise your patient won't like you very much. And others where the cup is put on a place and just left. Interestingly, most of the cupping therapy research is done with cups left in place. So you are more likely to get a result similar to the results in a article by not moving the cups. However, as manual therapists, we like to do stuff. So moving the cups around makes us happy. And certainly it does tick some of the boxes. If you think about cupping as a manual therapy, it provides the patient with something they're familiar with, even though there is this new sensation of suction. So I think neurologically, it does a lot of the same things as manual therapy. Whereas I think when you leave a cup static, there are some different physiological processes happening. None of that has been investigated though. So I think that's just kind of what I believe from doing it for 20 years.
Ashley is asking which type of cups provide the best results overall.
That is like asking which food is the most nutritious. The cups that you have are the ones that are going to do the best job. There has not been any real investigations on does the amount of suction matter? Do cups that are lighter create better treatment outcomes than cups that have heavy suction? I kind of go by, in my own practice, but also in my classes, I kind of go by use the cup that has the most uses, in terms of some people really love the hard plastic cups. Some people like silicone cups. Some people like different shapes of different silicone cups. And it's the one that fits your hand and the one that uses the way you process how you would normally have done soft tissue anyway, the one that mimics that the best is the one that's probably going to work best for you.
Elaine made a comment, movement cupping showed looser tissue for her.
Oh, absolutely. But is that a tissue response or is that a neurological response? Was it the feeling that it was looser? Or was it actually looser? And how did you test it? Right. And then if you added movement, like cupping, moving cupping, so there's massage cupping where you take the cup and you massage it. And then there's cupping with movement where you put the cups on and you make the client move. So which one are we talking about? And in that case, how did you assess the results? Are the results assessed by a decrease in your pain scale? Are they assessed like by that PPT device where you're pressing on the tissue to elicit a pain response and seeing how much pressure it takes? So that idea of this is how it feels good for me, that's a great thing to know, but it won't feel that way for everybody else because your perceptions color that.
Another comment came in, silicone cups applied with oils and moved in patterns are being used as an offering in corporate spas, and they promote it as both fascial release and lymphatic drainage.
Yeah, they offer all sorts of things and talk all sorts of stuff, but does that really happen? I find fascial release, I think, is really interesting because historically we've used this idea that we're working on fascia, whereas I don't think that you can work on fascia without first working on the skin. And if you're working on the skin, you're also working on the neurological system and the capillary bed. So how are you measuring this change in fascia? Because a lot of treatments can be explained by a neurological consequence rather than I only was able to somehow mystically put my hands on you, feel down to that particular layer of fascia and manipulate that fascia without manipulating anything else. The body isn't a closed system. It's not simple like that. Most likely we've been influencing all these overlapping systems. And if the patient feels better, the client feels better at the end, great. What does the story really matter?
Someone just asked, so we have to buy testing equipment.
Well, if you want to do it as a study, yes, you would buy testing equipment. But on the other side of it, you could just have a whole lot of 10-centimeter lines on pieces of paper and say, how do you feel before and after your test? That's a really good way to do it. You could buy a subscription to use and in some particular cases, you don't have to buy a subscription, but you could use the Oswestry Disability Index, what else do we do? The Womack style for osteoarthritis. You could use the SF36, so that one's expensive, or some other type of thing like that, and just work it into your system to actually have a validated assessment tool pre and post that shows you that people have changed over time.
I wanted to jump back to Elaine, who asked about movement cupping.
Mm-hmm.
She did reply back, the cup was moved, decreased pain, muscles moved better with the fascia looser.
How do you know it was the fascia that was looser? I just think it's interesting. How do you know that the fascia is looser? Because the skin moved more? Well, then maybe it was just the skin that was loose. It's just an interesting thing. I think there's a lot that we talk about doing all sorts of things, and I'm not sure. Sure, the fascia is continuous throughout the body. So is the blood vessels. So is the nervous system. So what?
Well, I think maybe I need to wrap it up there as we're running out of time as well. Yes, and feel free to contact Paul after you receive the email tomorrow, and keep asking him these great questions. But please watch your in-basket for the follow-up email with all this good information and some of the studies. Paul, I as things are opening up now in the industry, will you be at any upcoming events, massage conventions, or trade shows?
I will be. I'm going to be in June at FSMTA convention in St. Augustine, Florida. And in August, I'm going to be at AMT National. I think that's in Cleveland this year. So I'm excited about that. We're doing some courses this weekend. I'm going to be in Winnipeg doing a course for athletic therapists. I'm going to be in Winnipeg for a couple others. And then I've got some online courses. It's just very exciting.
Wonderful. I mean, just like spring, it seems like the industry is starting to come awake again. And this will hopefully we're all ready for conventions and trade shows and everything and learning more. I think that's it. Am I forgetting something? Yes, I am. I'm forgetting to mention the upcoming EduTalks. That March 22nd, we will have Heath and Nicole Reed, who did an EduTalk at the beginning of the year. They will speak on tools to embody a self-care lifestyle. April, which, how is it April already? But April, Carol McClellan on April 5th, craniosacral therapy for conscious conception, pregnancy, and birth. And we'll end April with Jody Scholes on April 19th, Emblex, passing strategies that work. So we have a lot of good lineups. Paul, there are so many comments of enjoying your talk tonight and about your Facebook group. So
yes,
get online and check it out. Thank you so much for presenting tonight. Great information. And again, watch your in-basket for the follow-up email and join us for upcoming EduTalks.
Well, we got one more thing.
What's that?
We got one more thing.
What's one more thing?
I would like to extend a small discount for our friends who are here today.
Well, that will be in the email follow-up tomorrow as well.
Excellent news.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Join us for our upcoming EduTalks. Paul, we'll see you out and about, live and in person, through the rest of the year. Thank you, everyone. Be safe. Join us again. Take care.